Hey, Tim Frisch with A Frisch Perspective, your Christian nerd bringing you analysis, reviews, and fun. Today I want to talk about something very simple, actually, just looking at the New King James Version and comparing it to the King James Version, showing you a little bit here about how the New King James Version does a good job of updating the language of the King James Version. So I have done comparison videos of different translations, and as I do those comparisons, people have their pretty strong opinions about which translation of the Bible they like. But when it comes to the King James Version, you have some of the strongest opinions about it. And so in talking about the New King James and its update of the King James, I want to say what I've said before. I really like the King James Version in many ways. It's a historic translation, has had a lot of influence in Christianity and in the English-speaking world. It still is a highly sold translation with a lot of influence. It's still how people think of the Bible when they think of how the Bible should sound. They think of the King James Version. So because I have so much respect for the King James Version itself, although I use other translations too, I really like the New King James Version. I think it's a great update. Now, some people might say, well, why do you need to update the King James Version? Well, one of the big reasons is the archaic language of the King James Version, or the words that we think we understand, but they no longer mean what they used to mean. And so I'm just going to show you a couple of examples here of how the New King James updates the King James language. I must say too, before I show you, that the New King James was not just something that was done willy-nilly. Everybody likes the King James. Let's just go and update a little bit of the wording of the King James Version and call it the New King James. They spent, I believe, 7 years on this translation, the New King James. It's very scholarly, very thorough, and yet it is very respectful and honoring to the King James Version itself. It's consciously trying to maintain the literary beauty and heritage of the King James Version. So you can watch my video on the New King James translation. I have a couple actually where I talk about its history, its development, its production. So you might want to check that out. But let's look at a couple of examples here of the King James Version and what the New King James Version does to update it. So the first passage I have here is 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14. The King James Version says, "Watch ye, stand fast in the faith, quit you like men, be strong, let all your things be done with charity." When you look at the New King James Version, it says, "Watch, stand fast in the faith, be brave, be strong, let all that you do be done with love." So there's a couple of words here where I think the New King James Version really helps to clarify and really helps modern readers to understand what's being said here in these verses. The first has to do, obviously, with this phrase, "quit you like men," in the King James Version, which people today probably would have a really hard time understanding and really wouldn't understand exactly what that means. What the New King James does here is actually just get at the meaning of it. It just says be brave. Some translations actually say act like men, but what that's really talking about is being courageous. And so the New King James, instead of saying quit you like men, which could easily be misunderstood, says be brave. And then at the end here, let all your things be done with charity is changed to with love. And it's not that charity isn't a word we use today. It's just we usually mean that when we're talking about giving to charity. So people might hear that and say, okay, let all things be done with charity. So we need to give to charity. It just can be hard for the average person today to understand exactly what that means. But it's really talking about doing what you do with love, with concern for others. So that's one passage. Another one is 2 Corinthians 11 and 12. The King James Version says, "O ye Corinthians, our mouth is opened unto you. Our heart is enlarged. Ye are not straitened in us, but ye are straitened in your own bowels." Now, I'd love to know, if you are not a reader of the King James Version and you read that for the first time, can you tell me what that means? Our mouth is open unto you, our heart is enlarged. Ye are not straitened in us, but ye are straitened in your own bowels. Now, I have no problem with someone looking up words or looking up commentaries, but when you have to be dependent on looking up commentaries and what people say about something in order to understand it, to me, if you can translate in a way that's clear, then that's helpful to the reader. And I really think the King James translators wanted average readers to be able to read and understand. But when you look at this passage here, it is really hard to understand and actually sounds pretty funny. Our mouth is open to you, our heart enlarged. You are straitened in your own bowels. So what does that mean, right? Now let's look at how the New King James translates that. O Corinthians, we have spoken openly to you. Our heart is wide open. You are not restricted by us, but you are restricted by your own affections. Now, if you're familiar with biblical language, you might have been able to figure out what the King James was saying, but most people wouldn't. Bowels to them is, your intestines. So what in the world is Paul talking about there? What is the Bible saying? But then when it talks in the New King James about your affections, it's much clearer, and that's what it would have meant to the hearers as Paul was writing. So those are just some examples. I just thought it'd be fun to do a little video to show this, that the King James Version, it's wonderful. It has great heritage. I think people should still read it, but there is a disadvantage that it has places where it's really hard, if not impossible, to understand what's being said unless you have something to help you understand it. But the New King James Version, if you really want to have the flavor and the literary beauty of the King James Version in many ways, a scholarly translation and update of the King James, the New King James is a really good translation, and it really takes care of some of those places where it's just really hard to understand what the King James Version is saying. So I know in response to what I've said here, some may take this as a put down of the King James Version, but again, that is not what I'm trying to do. I'm just pointing out some of the differences here and why I think the New King James is a good update and a good translation to have. So please don't skewer me in the comments. But I do enjoy hearing what you think about things. Just keep the comments positive and productive. And as always, thank you for listening to my thoughts from a Frisch Perspective.